Street Cred, breaking down all things MMA with Thomas Dozier and Nick Turdick. Street Cred.
Okay. Nick, I know that we spoke last week about the 170 guys, okay? And I know you had a lot of ideas and a lot of things you wanted to talk about. So let's get into it. What's happening at 170?
Well, I think 170 is one of those weight classes where if you look at the top guys, their next fight is, in my opinion, the biggest fight they're going to probably of their careers thus far. Okay? Wonderboy Thompson, for example, this weekend, if he loses this fight to Jeff Neal, I would be concerned that he'd be one of the guys that are getting cut from the UFC. I'll look at
Wow.
And then he's at number 5. Number 4, Jorge Masvidal, right? He's just coming off a loss against a short notice fight with Kamaru Usman.
Right.
I think the UFC needs to make the Colby fight with him.
I know.
If he wins that, if Masvidal beats Colby, he definitely deserves a rematch with a full camp against Kamaru.
Okay. And you know what else? The exact same opposite. If Colby wins, he's got to get a rematch.
Absolutely, and that's where I was going to go next. Colby needs a rematch against Kamaru. And then if you look at the third guy, Leon Edwards, who hasn't had a break this whole entire year, right, was scheduled to fight Hamzat.
I know.
If he beats Hamzat, he takes all that hype and he puts it in his corner. If he loses to Hamzat, I don't know where he goes after that. Then who is he stuck fighting? Those other guys in the weight, maybe Neil Magny or Michael Chiesa. I don't know what happens to Leon Edwards if he loses to Hamzat Chimaev. The 2 guy in the weight is Gilbert Burns, who I think should be the number 1 contender. Obviously, I think they need to make that match before we get the Colby rematch. It needs to be Gilbert Burns versus Kamaru Usman. And then if Usman, in my opinion, I think Usman will beat Burns, and then we can get the Colby rematch if Colby beats Masvidal. I think that's how the 170-pound weight class should shape up, but who knows? I mean, it wouldn't surprise me if something crazier happened.
Well, that's interesting. You know what's funny? That they didn't make that fight yet.
I don't know why. To me, it seems pretty clean cut. You got the 2 guys. They both want to fight each other. Make the fight.
Because we've been waiting now for a while, right?
So Masvidal fought Gilbert Burns back in when? August? Maybe September?
No.
Masvidal fought Usman in August, maybe?
Right. So there's been a lot of time.
Yeah, and Colby fought Tyron Woodley maybe around the same time. So, you got guys that schedules are lining up. I don't know why they're not all over this.
Right. You've got some big question marks here now. Like you said, Leon Edwards, Colby, Masvidal, right? How do you play this out here? And the other thing that's interesting is a lot of sites where you go to rankings have Masvidal ranked so high.
Yeah.
And you're saying, you talk about a hype train. Good fighter. Didn't show me how great he was with the Nate Diaz fight. And then I guess a short camp. We don't want to sell him short with the Usman fight. But he looked like he was outclassed even with a great camp. So I don't really know how that's going to play out. What does his future play out now?
I agree. And in my opinion, taking that Kamaru Usman fight on short notice was the worst thing that he could have done. You can argue that Jorge Masvidal is one of the biggest stars in mixed martial arts.
Oh, yeah, sure.
And losing to Kamaru Usman, and not only did he lose, but he really didn't show any glimpses of him ever beating him. And that's what I think is that's what I think is the worst thing that came out of it. There wasn't a, and I know he didn't have a full training camp, and I know things could have been different, but there was nothing in that fight that spoke to me that, well, maybe, with the full camp, he could beat him. I don't think he'll ever beat him. So what do you do with a guy like that?
This is going to be so interesting because we saw this with Tony Ferguson, and now with the speed that things are moving, we've got these guys, legitimate superstars, right? That seem to fade out a little bit. And then the next thing you know, they're getting picked up in a subpar organization to keep their careers going, moving along.
Yeah, I mean, and I know Bellator has spoken out. They don't want to be the organization that takes in all the old and decrepit UFC guys. You know what I mean? So you're going to eventually see them saying no to these guys.
Wow. Right. Give us your wounded, give us your sick.
Yeah. So, but think about it. If, I believe Yoel Romero signed to Bellator and Anthony Rumble Johnson signed to Bellator. That's 2 UFC guys. People would pay, I think, to see that fight. Anthony Johnson is, he's a huge draw, and people love Yoel Romero. So I think Bellator would be stupid to not take some of these guys. I know they don't want to be labeled as, the second tier to the UFC, but they are, and they need to, they need to take these guys as they fall from the UFC tree. Like if Tony Ferguson got cut, I know Big John said that was a possibility. The Bellator would be stupid not to pick him up. It's Tony Ferguson. The guy's got fans. Arguably, he might have some of the most fans out of anyone in the UFC.
You know what? This is kind of like a weird thing that's playing out right now, is that it looks like the UFC wants to have everybody running at a title, right? To create that hype, which is fantastic. And then if they don't think that you can really make a splash and be in that circle around that top, they don't want to have fighters fighting just to fight anymore, like it used to be. Remember when great fighters were just mixing it up just to fight?
Yeah.
You're not seeing that as much now in the UFC.
Yeah. Well, it'll start, if 60 guys get cut, you're going to see a lot of guys be a little bit more selective on who they fight. You know what I mean? Because you're going to be looking at a list. They're not going to
have a choice, Nick, if 60 guys get cut.
I seriously, and you're going to be looking at a list, and there's going to be 4 guys on the list that you could fight, and you're going to be like, well, I really don't want to fight him. I don't want to fight him. I don't want to fight him. I guess who's the lesser of the 3 evils?
That's right. And you know what else has gone by the wayside? And the cuts have a lot to do with it. Do you remember the days where guys would get a contract and they would say, I'm not fighting for that kind of money?
I mean, when I was watching UFC 35.
Oh my God.
35. And they were talking about how these guys, all have, full-time jobs along with fighting in the UFC.
Listen, Conor McGregor has ruined so many of these guys' careers, and I'm going to tell you just one perspective of how. All right? He came out and started making millions of dollars, and all these guys got this brainstorm in their head that they were going to get Conor money. And they started holding out and saying, and it happened with the first guy was probably John Jones. And it started happening right from there and trickled all the way down through all the guys. And they said, oh, I'll fight a top tier guy. I want to get paid. Right. And that started happening just before the pandemic. And very quietly, other guys stepped in. They made fights that they were trying to make for a long time. A lot of other guys held out. And a lot of those guys are getting released now because they were difficult to contract with.
Yeah. I mean, if you think about it, if you're a pain in the ass, right, and then you lose fights, there's really no reason to keep you. So if you think about it, if you're somebody who is a pain in the ass to negotiate with. You're selective on who you want to fight, and you lose. If you're the owner or if you're the UFC, you're going to be like, all right, well, I don't need this headache anymore. I'll find some other kid that will fight for $40,000 a year or $40,000 a fight, and you'll be happy to do it.
Right, because what we see is like a headline that says, yeah, we tried to make the fight. He wouldn't take the fight. But behind the scenes, they were haggling about contract and pricing, and no one wanted to be the one to give in a little bit. And the next thing you know, somebody else is fighting your fight.
Yep.
You're sitting on the sidelines, and then you're cut.
Yeah, because the longer you sit and the longer the more you're not active, the more irrelevant you are because of, like we always say, the speed of this, the MMA is just ridiculous. I mean, I watched every single fight, every single weekend, almost the past 2 years. And there are guys I've seen over and over that, I have to look up and try to remember who they fought last and their results because, there's just so much of it.
Right. And think about, we talked about Masvidal. Think about if he didn't take the fight on the short camp, he would be still sitting around.
I know, but he'd be sitting around with a little bit more, with a better leg to stand on.
You're going to say that, and I'm going to say that from a realistic standpoint. But guess what? When you sit around for a long time, Nick, we said this about Dillashaw. We talked about Dillashaw and said, oh, man, I completely forgot about Dillashaw. How did we completely forget about him? I'm going to tell you why, and you already know why.
Because there's so many other guys.
And he has not been around.
Yeah. He's been inactive. He's been suspended.
I understand that. But what is the difference in your mind or the public's mind if you say, haven't seen a guy in a while, kind of put him out of my mind? The reason you haven't seen him, whether it be suspension or they just haven't gotten the guy into action or the guy was difficult to make a contract with, it's all the same end result, Nick. You haven't seen him.
Yeah.
Right? You got to be out there.
Mind.
Look at a guy like Kevin Holland, right? All we know and all we talk about is the great Kevin Holland. Why? Because we keep seeing him.
Yeah, every weekend. I feel like my daughter's going to start calling him Uncle Kevin because she sees him on the TV so much.
Wow. Do you think, that it's better to take for a guy, let's just call out random guys, let's say for a guy like Masvidal or Kobe, whoever. Do you think it's better to just get yourself back on the board with a decent contract without trying to push to the limit of the absolute amount you can make, just to get your name going a little bit, to get some traction and get out there again? Don't you think that might be a good move?
I do think it's a good move. But anything can happen, and especially, in mixed martial arts. If you take one bad loss, it could totally derail you.
I know.
So you gotta see, does the risk outweigh the reward? And in some cases, I don't think it does. I think sitting around, and waiting sometimes is a better strategy than to just go, and there's really not too many guys that get tune-up fights. That's more of like a boxing thing, like in MMA, it's a little bit more competitive. The guys that you're going to fight are top level guys.
That's the whole thing, right? That's a great point. You don't get the tune-up fights to keep you active. You get to stand on the sideline and then come in after 7, 8, 9 months for a high-level fight that could break your career.
Yeah, it's totally different. Again, like boxing has that luxury that they could box once a year and only box guys that are like mid-par until they get enough behind them to build that huge, that huge bout with whoever. I mean, we're about to see it with Tyson Fury and Anthony Joshua, in my opinion. I think those two, should definitely square up. But again, with boxing, they might want another tune-up fight, this and that. Is it going to happen? I don't know. It's different than, mixed martial arts.
Right. But you're right about that, though. You get in the boxing, you get to move slower with the fighting, where they kind of spoon feed you as they bring you up. And the UFC, it's like sink or swim. You're in the deep end almost immediately.
Exactly. And it's, I love that competitive nature of the UFC, and mixed martial arts in general. I remember, when I watch boxing cards and stuff like that, you get this like up and coming kid from like, South California, and he's like this tough, like Mexican American kid, young, got a lot of hype behind him, and they'll throw some guy who has no business being in the ring with him just to get absolutely sacrificed in front of a lot of people. And it rubs me the wrong way. Because in boxing, if you have a loss or a couple losses on your record, you're almost like not marketable.
That's right. It's a different game, but like we were saying with Kevin Holland, they're getting to see you a lot. Your name is always out there.
Yeah.
And these cats that are waiting in the sidelines right now, and I hope it doesn't happen to Kobe, but it's definitely happened to a guy like Leon Edwards and also Masvidal, where they're thinking they've got all the chips on their side, but the reality is their next fight could be actually creating one of the last years of their career, if not the last year of their career.
Yeah. I mean,
right?
you don't want to stand on the side and wave as the parade goes by. You know what I mean?
That's right. Because with these guys, Nick, they have a championship belt holding mentality, even if it's the bad mother effer belt.
Yeah.
And I guess in their minds, they're saying, look, I'm going to fight championship guys or I'm not going to fight. And that's what we're seeing now.
Yeah. I think I think a guy like Colby Covington, if I was him, I wouldn't take a fight that's not a championship fight. So I could see why he's maybe hesitant to fight Masvidal when all he really wants and has been campaigning for is the Usman rematch. So you also got to look at it from his shoes. Like he wants that rematch more than he wants everything. He wanted that rematch the second they stopped the fight.
Well, and I agree with that. But you know what's interesting? At least if Colby fights Masvidal and it ends in a decision, let's say Colby doesn't win, they can run it back, and that's a great fight.
Oh yeah, I hope
that's
they
something
make
that's a
fight.
great fight. And I think that the Colby rerun with Usman is a great fight too. But I don't think it's necessary that we see Masvidal in that spot with Usman again. I just don't think it is.
No, we saw it. We saw what we had to see.
We did. Right.
Yeah.
All right, brother. Well, it's always a pleasure talking to you, Nick. And we'll talk soon. Over and out, bro.
Thanks, Tom. Take it easy.